In the 21st century, media holds a great responsibility in creating and influencing public opinion on gender and sexuality. From the waking moment of your day, media is everywhere. Before work or school, if you would turn on your radio, it is a type of media that shares different information on us. Like in a public transport, media is also present. After work or school, you will see a billboard, which is a type of media representation. Watching on YouTube, which is also a media representation. Moving on, we will going to talk about male gaze. The male gaze describes a way of portraying and looking at women that empowers men while sexualizing and diminishing women. While biologically from early adolescence on, we are driven to look at and evaluate each other as potential mates. The male gaze twists this natural urge, turning the women into passive items to possess and use as props. British feminist film theorist Laura Mulvey described the concept of the male gaze in her 1973 essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, which was published in the year 1975 in the Film Theory magazine Screen. In the article, Mulvey, who is a professor of film and media studies at University of London, explained the way that mainstream media objectifies women, showing the female body through a heterosexual male lens as a passive non-actor secondary to the active male characters. This concept extends from film to any medium in which women are portrayed as well as generally to their experience in real life. For example, think about how women are often shown in advertisements, magazine covers, and social media compared with men, as well as how their bodies are typically framed by the camera. Consider the emphasis typically placed on how women look, dressed, and comfort themselves even on their expression as opposed to for men. Examples. Blurred Lines is a perfect example of how women are sexualized and treated like objects by men. There is an explicit version of the video showing women naked. It is said that sexualization of women is also portrayed in magazines. Moving on, three perspectives to consider in the male gaze theory in cinematography. Number one, producers. Films are mostly made by male producers. Number two, audience. Number three, male character. It is argued that women are there to be looked at by other characters. Example of male gaze in advertising. This advertisement was made for men and hoping that this perfume will sell better. The next one is the three general ways on how public view women. Number one, how men look at women, how women look at themselves, and lastly, how look at other women. Moving on, the effect of male gaze on women. Number one, the consequences of male gaze as of viewing women as a visual pleasure or sexual objects. Number two, insecure about the female self-image. Causes stress and actual mental and physical disorders. Often causes employment discrimination and sexual violence according to Fredrickson Roberts, year 1997. Now, let's move on to the three themes describe how media represent gender. Number one, underrepresentation of women. Number two, stereotypical portrayals of women and men. Number three, stereotypical images of relationship between men and women. Underrepresentation of women. A primary way in which media distort reality is underrepresenting women. stereotypical portrayals of women and men. In general, media continue to present both women and men in stereotyped ways that limit our perceptions of human possibilities. Typically, men are portrayed as active, adventurous, powerful, sexually aggressive, and largely uninvolved in human relationships. Just as consistent with cultural views of gender are depictions of women as sex objects who are usually young, thin, beautiful, passive, dependent, and often incompetent and dumb. Stereotypical images of relationship between men and women. Women's dependence, men's independence. Men's authority, women's incompetence. Women as primary caregivers, men as breadwinners. Women as victims and sex objects, men as aggressors. In the last 50 years, the depiction of women in the media has changed dramatically. Once featured almost exclusively in the home setting, women are now prominently featured in a variety of roles and settings. Popular culture follows reality. The modern media age and the feminist movement coincide like their real-life counterparts. Female characters are doctors, housewives, lawyers, domestic workers, and writers. Yet, many critics are quick to point out that women and to some extent men in media are overwhelmingly stylized and idealized depictions of their real-life counterparts. Movies and television shows with female-targeted themes derived as chick flicks are increasingly popular but may also play to stereotypes of gender roles and preconceived notions of women's desires. Finally, gay characters are new to movies and televisions. In cinemas, gay characters were often depicted as effete dandies. In addition, historically, the portrayals of LGBT communities in media have been negative, reflecting the cultural intolerance of LGBT individuals. However, from the 1990s to present day, there has been an increase in the depictions of LGBT people, issues, and concerns within mainstream media in North America. The LGBT communities have taken an increasingly proactive stand in defining their own culture with the primary goal of achieving an affirmative visibility in mainstream media. The positive portrayal or increased presence of the LGBT communities in media has served to increase acceptance and support for LGBT communities, establish LGBT communities as a norm, and provide information on the topic. Although lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals are generally distinguishable from their straight or cisgender counterparts, media depictions of LGBT individuals often represent them as visibly and behaviorally different. For example, in many forms of popular entertainment, gay men are portrayed stereotypically as promiscuous, flashy, flamboyant, and bold, while the reverse is often true to how lesbians are portrayed. Media representations of bisexual and transgender people tend to either completely erase them or depict them as morally corrupt or mentally unstable. Similar to race, religion, and class-based caricatures, these stereotypical stock character representations vilify or make light of marginalized and misunderstood groups. Media literacy, put simply, is the ability to identify different types of media and the messages they are sending. When we speak of media, it can encompass print media such as newspapers, magazines, and posters, and theatrical presentations, tweets, radio broadcasts, and etc. Being able to understand these various forms of information with an ability to make sense of what is presented is key. Therefore, it is important when using various forms of media to consider the credibility of the source, as well as to draw a conclusion about the viewpoint or position being presented. That's all for today's video. Thank you for watching and listening.